What's up, guys? Welcome to J Spark Garage, where today we're going to be fixing the AC in the Chrysler 300. Alright, so here's what happened. I'm driving down the road, minding my own business. I stop at a red light. I look over to my left and I see a sweet supercharged Ford Lightning. I said, "Hey, nice truck." He said, "Hey, nice car." At that point, I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, I start hearing a squealing. I'm like, what the heck? That can't be my car. It must be the clunker in front of me or something. At that point, I'm like, okay. Light turns green. I start seeing this puff of smoke coming from underneath the hood. And I'm like, what? That's my car. Holy crap. Light turns green. Start going. I'm like, okay, well, gotta pull over somewhere. All of a sudden, squealing stops. Smoke disappears. Continue on down the road a little bit. Don't hear anything funny. Well, then I noticed the AC stopped working. At that point, I'm like, okay, I wonder what it could be. So I got it home, checked it out. Looks like the AC compressor puked its plastic guts in the clutch. So at that point, I'm like, I don't know what happened. The AC doesn't seem to be, or the compressor doesn't seem to be locked up. I could still turn it a little bit. When I put on the AC now, it'll turn the AC compressor a little bit, kind of in a jerking motion, but it won't completely turn around and lock up. So I don't know if the AC compressor went bad or if the clutch went bad. So at that point, the safest bet is to change the compressor and then flush the system. In doing so, you also want to replace the condenser on this car, the dryer, and the evaporator valve. So I got all that stuff from Rock Auto. This isn't sponsored. I paid full price. Total came to about 280 bucks for everything. So let's check it out. I'm going to start taking apart the front bumper. After that, we'll look at the parts I have and go from there. Alright guys, as you see, managed to get the bumper off. Didn't take too long. Here's where we get into some challenges. Condenser, it's right behind here. Of course, we have to take this intercooler off that's been there for 5-6 years. So I'm not anticipating these couplings coming off very easily from the intercooler. So brackets are loose. Basic goal is get the intercooler off, start unbolting the condenser, and there's the lines. Dryer is already connected to the condenser, and it actually comes on the new condenser that way, so don't have to worry about that. A few other parts of the repair. Back there, tucked away nice and neat, is the expansion valve. So we're gonna have to change that out. Once you loosen that center bolt, you'll have 2 Allen bolts behind that to be able to take that off and put it back on, put the new one on. Compressor, gonna be a little bit of a challenge. Of course, don't have much access up top because of the supercharger. So I'm really hoping I got decent access underneath. So now, something to keep in mind: it is illegal to release refrigerant up into the air. I've already taken the car to a friend of mine who evacuated the system and reclaimed the refrigerant in it. So we should be dealing with no refrigerant in it already. So that's good to go. Other than that, it's just a matter of removing the parts and putting the new ones on. Speaking of the new ones, let's check them out. So alright guys, here's the parts we're working with. Got a new compressor, condenser, expansion valve, and all new seals for it. This came as a kit from Rock Auto. Definitely recommend replacing all of these parts if you're doing anything AC work. Condenser already came with a dryer, so good to go on that. Compressor comes with a clutch already. It's got oil in it already. We're going to measure it out later, make sure we have enough, but from there, we're good. You can buy all these parts separately. I would definitely, if you're going to work on the compressor, do you think there's any chance of it getting contaminants in the refrigerant, then I would definitely recommend going ahead and replacing all this. You can't really flush the condenser because the lines are too small. You won't really get a good flush on it, so that's why they suggest replacing that also. So we're gonna get the car back in here and start tearing down that front end a little bit more. Well, here at J-Spark Garage, we learn something new every single day. I didn't realize transmission runs through the AC condenser. Did anybody else knew that? I've only ever seen it run through the bottom of like the radiator. It's a separate chamber for them to run through the radiator to keep cool. So that's something new I didn't know about. But pretty straightforward. For the transmission lines, there's these little clips right here that snap in. You pull back the rubber boot, pull these out, and the lines just slip right out. These are pretty straightforward. They had studs in them. And take the bolts off, lines pop right out. I've got a new gasket for that already. Same with this bottom one. So, one part done. We got to put the new one in. We're not going to connect the line because we still have to flush them, but that'll get us at least rolling again. So, stay tuned. All right, guys. As you see, we've got the condenser back on, the new one. Transmission lines hooked up. AC lines still loose so we can flush. Temporarily mounted the oil cooler, or excuse me, that's power steering cooler. And then I'm finding out we might have a challenge here. Let's go underneath and I'll show you. All right, as you can see, there's the compressor. Problem is, those transmission lines that actually run to the top of the condenser are probably going to prevent us from getting it out through the bottom. Going to be a slight challenge. I'm going to work on it and get back, see what I come up with. All right, guys, success. Got the compressor out, but it was not without some challenges. As I said before, I didn't think it was going to come out the bottom, and sure enough, it definitely gave me some challenges. Here's the space. I was trying to get it out. Wasn't happening. Went through my options of dropping the radiator, pulling the supercharger out, pulling it out the top. Ultimately, I decided to lose a little bit of transmission fluid. Disconnected these lines. These moved over toward the front of the car to allow a bigger opening right here. And with a little bit of twisting and turning, dropped right out. So, only lost a little bit of transmission. So we'll definitely have to check the transmission fluid once we get it back up and running and go from there. Alrighty, we are on day number 2. So here's the deal. So I spent the rest of the first day trying to get these studs out of the old compressor because the new compressor didn't come with one. Problem was, tried getting a socket on the end here, wouldn't come off. Started getting more aggressive, vice grips wouldn't come off, tried penetrating oil, a whole 9 yards, could not get it off. At that point, my family came home, decided to spend the rest of the day hearing about their day. So came back today with a fresh new mindset and realized I forgot the oldest trick in the book to get them out. You take one nut, screw it on, take 2 nuts, screw it on, jam these 2 nuts together, and was able to break the stud free and get it out. Definitely a cool trick for any kind of stud you're trying to get out. Jam them together. That gives you something really firm to twist that stud out of the socket. Don't do what I did. I spent probably about an hour trying to get it out with vice grips, channel locks, you name it. So jam nut, boom, just like that, unscrewed. All right, so we're gonna recap a little bit. New condenser is in. Lines are still not in yet because need to do the flushing. I got the compressor out down here. All that's left is right back here. We have the expansion valve we need to get out. At that point, all that's left is clean the lines and start putting the new equipment in. Let's do it. that was a mess. But I got it all done. Flushed out all of the lines. So honestly, at the moment, I don't know where all the oil was for the AC. The compressor I took out doesn't have any oil in it whatsoever. It's not coming out. I've been having it upside down, spinning it, left it upside down. Haven't gotten a drop of oil out of it. So I can only assume the oil was elsewhere in the system, either in the condenser or the evaporator. The condenser, I can't seem to get any oil out. But again, the holes for the condensers for the tubes are really small, so I don't know if it's maybe trapped in there. The evaporator, I did get a lot of gray oil or gray flush out of it when I was flushing it with the AC flush. So I can only assume there was quite a bit of oil in the AC evaporator, or it leaked out somewhere. So I want to show you one thing. So this is one of the lines. It's right before it goes into the expansion valve. As you can see, this one's corroded around the stud and around the surface of the aluminum. I did notice some oily residue around this joint also, so I'm thinking maybe I had a lot of oil escape through there, but I'm not sure. So I'm definitely going to clean this up. The next dilemma I'm having are the new O-rings. These O-rings, I've got like 4 big ones, but this one's a slightly bigger diameter than the other 3. And these 3, this one is slightly thinner. Same with these over here. These 2 are the same. This one's a little bit smaller and a little bit thicker. And then with the little ones, again, same deal. I got a thick one here. These 2 look a little on the bigger side, then these 2 are really thin. That looks like it could be equal to that. So the next hurdle to find out is, where do each of those go? They're different sizes, different thicknesses of the O-rings, so we're gonna have to figure it out. But definitely looking through all of the hoses, I do notice one thing that could possibly lead to where each of those O-rings are going. You can't really use the old O-rings because they've been stretched, they've been compressed, so it's not a good judge. But what I have found out is, if you notice the hoses themselves, so this, the O-ring kind of sits on the outside. Notice that diameter. Well, then I come over to, say, this hose. This one, the O-ring sits in a groove inside of it, and then the diameter, the thickness of that hose at the end is a little thinner. So comment below if you think I'm on the right track or if I'm on the wrong, if I'm doing it wrong. But what I'm going to do is basically take the O-ring and match up the thickness of the tube, and whether it's in a channel or whether it's on the outside of the tube, to determine where each O-ring is going to go. I think I've got it figured out, but I don't know. So comment below if you know how to determine where each O-ring is supposed to go in the system, because of course the packaging didn't say. Now that I've flushed out every single component in the system, I'm going to be able to use the factory service manual to determine how much oil I'm going to be putting into it. So we're going to get the old oil, or we're going to get the new oil out of the new compressor, measure how much oil that is, add to it whatever we need for the condenser and evaporator and the dryer and all of that, add that to it, and we should be good to go. So stay tuned. I will get back to you once I get all the lines in, and we'll measure out the oil in the compressor. All right, guys, that's right. It's been a couple days later. I have been battling this. Of course, never fails. It always takes longer than you planned. Basically what happened was, got all the plumbing done. and connected, ready to go, ready to start pulling a vacuum. Turn on the vacuum, hook up the gauges, turn on the vacuum pumps, or vacuum pump, and wouldn't you know, it wouldn't pull a vacuum at all. I'm like, okay, so I go into troubleshooting mode. Typically, start with the obvious. Vacuum pump, it's cheap, from Amazon, but verified it's working correctly. I then went through all of my fittings, pump, everything, and I remembered the one fitting that didn't quite go right was the expansion valve. That thing's a pain in the ass. Basically, it just didn't feel right. It all bolted up, everything seemed fine, but it didn't feel right. So, had to start into troubleshooting mode. I ended up pulling the 2 lines off the vacuum, or off the expansion valve. I'll show you on the old one. Right here. Pulled these 2 lines off with the vacuum pump going. Put my fingers over the tubes and started pulling a vacuum. So I'm like, all right. So now I know it's between the expansion valve and the evaporator core. So I'm like, okay, there's one more connection there on the other side of the expansion valve, on this side. So I'm like, okay, how do I test that? So I pull off the expansion valve, I hook it up to the 2 lines that go to the compressor and the condenser, and start pulling a vacuum again. Take my fingers, cover the holes, and it starts pulling a vacuum. So at this point, the expansion valve is fine. It's the connection between the expansion valve and the evaporator core. But my biggest fear was I possibly ruptured the evaporator core. And how do you test for that? So I start brainstorming. Come up with a simple test right over here. So you know I have a flusher. Flusher's made to push fluid through. But it has this cool gun with a rubber stopper, and it just so happens to have fittings, AC fittings, on this side. I was able to hook this up to my vacuum. So I hooked up to the vacuum pump, stuck this in the bigger hole on the expansion or evaporator tank, and held my finger on the other. Wouldn't you know, it starts pulling a vacuum. So that was a simple way of testing the evaporator core, if it had a leak or anything like that. Evaporator core tested perfect. That leads me to the part where, or the O-rings between the expansion valve and the evaporator core. I went through multiple O-rings. I ended up going and getting a kit full of all different types of O-rings, all different sizes. Nothing seemed to work. Finally just said, screw it, send it. I ended up putting some oversized O-rings in there, bolted it down, and wouldn't you know, it's pulling a vacuum now. Check it out. Vacuum pump's going, pulling a vacuum. We're good. I think we're all sealed up. So I'm gonna finish putting on the rest of the bumper and all, getting everything back together, all the wiring back on. Got to get the belt on the back on the compressor and the supercharger, and we'll be ready to charge. All right, we are at the final step. We've replaced the condenser, we've replaced the compressor, and we've replaced the expansion valve back there. Flushed all the lines. I vacuumed it down for about 2 hours now. We've switched out the vacuum pump for refrigerant. It's gonna go on top there. This is my typical setup of how I do it. I normally put a fan right in front. Probably doesn't do much, but it is what it is. Current ambient temperature is about 90 degrees. So looking through the charts, we're gonna shoot for targets. Ambient temperature is about 90 to 95 degrees. It'll go up a little bit, especially in the engine compartment. Inside, we're gonna have the AC on full blast, on recirculate, or on fresh air, and we're gonna try and get the temperature down. Initially, I don't expect it to come down completely, probably till about 65-ish, just because there's no movement. When you drive the car, you can have a lot more movement going through the front end, so it would cool it down a little bit more, and that's what I'm expecting. So we're gonna go with this. It's gonna take about an hour, but we're gonna get 2 cans in, and then a little bit of a third can. It's going to take 1.6 pounds. Comes out to about 25 ounces. So let's get this rolling. I'm ready for some cold air. Fix the AC. We didn't quite get into the 40-degree area, but I think 50.5 was the lowest I saw, and that's good enough for me. Ended up with 95 degrees ambient temperature with an outlet, and the center dash spent 50 degrees. So as you saw, pressures look good for this ambient temperature at around between 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We're looking at a low side between 30 and 40 and a high side between 125 and 350 psi. We ended right at that. Everything is looking extremely healthy. One of the things I'll show you, this is just a scale I use to measure when I ship packages and things like that. Each can weighed about 14.8 to 15 ounces. So all I did was I measured it initially with the hose and everything attached. We got 1 pound, 3.5 ounces. Now, we needed 25 ounces. So I measured every can that, the first 2 cans that came off, those were dead on, 12 ounces each. So I needed another ounce in there to meet factory specs. Probably isn't needed, but we'll go with it. We started off at 1 pound, 4.5 ounces. So while I was weighing it, we got to 1 pound, 3.5. That got me my exact 25 ounces of refrigerant I needed. All right, there you have it. We fixed the AC. 50 degrees when it's 100 degrees outside is perfect. Total cost was around about $450, $500. Definitely cheaper than you could have taken it to a shop. Wasn't too hard, just took some time. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and join me for my adventures in the garage. I see a sweet, old school, supercharged Ford Lightning. I'm like, hey, what's up? He said, hey, this is dumb.